Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Joanna Masiyiwa, an African philanthropist and business development officer at Delta Philanthropies, UK. I spoke to Joanna in depth about her role as a founding member of the Global Council of the Zeitz MOCAA in Cape Town. This interview was facilitated by AWITA, the Association of Women in the Arts here in London, during their annual conference for arts professionals, taking place at Christie's Auction House, with a keynote speech by Koyo, the executive director and chief curator of the Zeitz MOCAA. Listen on to hear me ask Joanna about why philanthropy is important to her and what her role entails as a global council member of the Zeitz Museum. I also ask her about her opinion on the management of the museum since Koyo came on as director in 2019, her perspective on the shared vision of the museum and its future, and so much more. Thank you, Joanna, for coming on the podcast, and to AWITA, the Zeitz MOCAA, and the team at Button Collective for facilitating. Before I dive in, I wanted to let you lovely listeners know that All About Art is on Patreon. So if you want some behind-the-scenes content, maybe a bit of merch, the chance to get one-on-ones with me and my guests, or you're simply wanting to support this project, I would be absolutely thrilled if you decided to sign up. You can do so through the link in the show notes. I also wanted to say thank you to those who have already signed up. Your support means the world, and it makes the further production, improvement, and growth of the podcast possible. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Joanna. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me. This is my first podcast, so I'm super excited.
So to start us off, I would love to hear more about your background. You are a founding member of the Global Council of the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art Africa and a patron of the arts, supporting organizations such as the Serpentine, the Royal Academy of Arts, and the Museum of Modern Art, New York. You are also the Business Development Officer at Delta Philanthropies, an impact investor and registered charity. Can you tell me more about your career development in philanthropy and thus also your interest in and your support of the arts?
Yes, of course. I started working for Delta Philanthropies, which is the kind of parent organization of my family's charity, Higher Life Foundation, which is based in Zimbabwe. So I started working there in 2021. I just graduated from Yale, which was during post-COVID, so my last semester was online, and it was kind of, what do I do? And feeling like there wasn't as many options. And so my reason for joining Delta was I wanted to have an insight into what my family was doing in philanthropy, but mostly I think I wanted to have an opportunity to understand how the systems of a global organization work from the inside. And so being it's a family-run organization, I had more access to really see how are we making grants, how are we partnering strategically, because I always knew that I wanted to be part of a much bigger kind of organization. So I started working there as a business development officer, which was really amazing because the foundation really covers a lot of really important areas of need on the continent. So I was working in rural livelihoods and sustainable development, and I was also working in health and in mental health advocacy and maternal health and then education as well. So I really got to see how a big organization runs. And now my parents, they started their foundation in 1997 after essentially I think 8-year-long battle with the Zimbabwean government for my dad to start his company.
Wow.
So essentially what happened was he started his telecoms company after returning from university in Wales, and it was he immediately had contention with the government, because during that time it was very difficult for them, and in terms of morale, but also financially, and they at the same time they were seeing the impact of the HIV and AIDS epidemic in Zimbabwe. And so a lot of the employees were dying and leaving behind their children, and my parents were giving them scholarships and sending them to school. But then they kind of realized that it's more than just scholarships, that pastoral care was needed for these, we call them history makers. So they set up the foundation initially called Capernaum Trust, and it was devoted to educating the history makers of Zimbabwe. And so to date, they've done about 250,000 scholarships, and they ended up expanding the foundation to cover a lot more areas of need within Zimbabwe. So essentially, when I got to the foundation, I was kind of seeing all the different things that we're working on, but I didn't really feel like I was as passionate about the things, the kind of causes that we were supporting. Like, obviously, it's amazing to be able to see the work we're doing in maternal health or with the vaccines for COVID, but I've always been really interested in the arts. I mean, I studied film and media studies, and I've watched Matilda the musical like 11 times. So I was really desperate to kind of utilize the experience that I was getting in a more personal realm.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated, I literally just started Googling all of the museum patron programs for the museums that I had visited, like all over the world, and cold emailing and being like, hi, I would really like to get involved in some capacity.
I'm sure they were thrilled. I'm sure they were like, yes, please.
Yeah, no, I was surprised at how welcoming a lot of these programs were, and also just how being a patron, you actually really do a lot of the times have the ability to make an impact. And I've noticed that the most with the Zeitz MOCAA and joining the Global Council. Because when I joined, there was 10 of us, I think. And I'm the youngest one. I think I'm still the youngest one. But it was really amazing because I was joining this group that was artists and patrons of art, and kind of a newer museum because it only opened in 2017.
Yeah.
So I was 19. And so it was really this exciting kind of time to figure out, like, okay, how do I use my voice, the privilege that I have, but also the kind of experience that I was gaining at my family's foundation, and kind of really make an impact. And so with the Zeitz MOCAA, it's been really cool to be instrumental in the development of a program that is so important in the way that it is championing art that's almost, I think, globally been overlooked, African art and Black art in general, but not from this place of struggle and disenfranchisement, but rather this like celebration of Blackness and the African diaspora, and really led by Koyo, who's just phenomenal. I mean, yeah, what she's managed to do since she joined in 2019 is nothing short of incredible. And so, yeah, it's been really cool to be around and go to the museum and see the progression, but also know the ways in which my voice actually has impacted things happening.
Yeah. Well, and in your role as Global Council member, what are your responsibilities and what sort of impact are you hoping to make at the museum?
So when I joined, it was about 10 members, maybe a little bit less. And now we're up to 16. And the whole purpose is to be both advocates and promoters of the museum and the museum's cause globally. So it's a lot of people from the continent, but also living in the diaspora from different sects of industry. So we have a really diverse range of people, but it's kind of the artists in conversation with patrons and working together to promote the mission of the museum and bring in other people, both from a fundraising perspective, but also education around what the museum is doing and what the goals of the museum are, because it's really the first of its kind. And so it's such a kind of honor, honestly, to be able to be part of this group that we meet. I think, like, honestly, we meet a lot. We meet a lot on mostly.
That's really good to hear. I'm not going to lie. Like, that's like, yeah, it bodes well.
Yeah. We meet on Zoom every couple of months. I think like 4 times a year, maybe even 6. And we always have an agenda, and it's really run quite, not militaristic, but it's
but
really
like with drive and organization.
Exactly,
like it's quite structured.
Yeah, it's very structured. And so we are able to understand the different initiatives that the museum's working on at any given time, and also ask questions about how are these certain programs funded, and how do we utilize the budget in a way that maximizes impact, and also how do we continue to share the goals of the museum with the broader community, but also the communities within South Africa and Africa in general, because I think there's really been, and I think this is a global thing, not just on the African continent, but I think people often feel quite unwelcome by these kind of institutions, museums, because of, I think, ideals around it not being for us, or not seeing themselves represented in these kinds of institutions. And I think that was something that before Koyo joined the Zeitz MOCAA that they kind of struggled with, was the local community not feeling like it was a place for them to learn and see themselves reflected, and enjoy and partake in. And so I think part of the Global Council and bringing together artists like Yinka Shinobare or Wangechi Mutu, Julie Mataro, in conversation with business leaders and art collectors and me, to just really see ourselves reflected in as people who enjoy the arts and want to learn more, and also want to continue to really share the stories of the African continent and our history in a way that is from our own voice, if that makes sense, kind of not reclaiming the narrative, but having an opportunity to build the narrative around how we want to be reflected and received and understood as global Black diaspora, but also just as individual African countries with artists who've been working and unrecognized for a really long time. So we get to really have those interesting conversations and ask those questions about how do we make ourselves known, and in a palatable way that is the people of Cape Town can feel like this is their place, but also just the wider African diaspora and other people who want to support the African diaspora as well.
Yeah. Well, and Koyo took over as executive director and chief curator of the museum in 2019. And in an article written by Rosalind Sulkas in the New York Times in 2023, at the time of her arrival at the museum, and I quote, morale was low and exhibitions lackluster. And you mentioned earlier that you think that what she's done, that she's had a huge contribution. She's given a huge contribution to the organization. So what methods do you think that she's implemented to turn this around? And how do you think that the Global Council members contribute to this as well? Because I think the aspect of managing people is definitely something not spoken about often enough in the arts sector. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, especially as someone who contributes to this shared vision of the museum's future.
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I think before Koyo joined the museum, we didn't have a real patrons program. There wasn't, the Global Council didn't exist. And so she really came in and made the museum function in such a way that people who wanted to support could understand how they could support and how they could be part of the museum's mission, because I think, and that was also what made it quite easy for me to see how I could get involved, because it was very set out, like, these are the corporate sponsors, this is the Global Council, these are the various groups that allow the museum to achieve its goals. And so I think as director, she's been really instrumental in making the museum run like an institution. And also, I think having that, like, obviously, like, too much bureaucracy can slow down the agenda, but she's really done it in a lean way that you are able to see, like, American Friends of the Zeitz with the Global Council and how these different elements of the museum kind of interact and promote the mission in different ways, while also feeling very unique and having our own purpose of what we're doing and understanding our mandate. So I think just the way that she structurally organized how the museum has been running with these different levels of patronage and these programs, I think has really solidified it as an institution. Which I think is really great, because as a Global Council member, you don't want to, as in any kind of patrons program, and I'm part of quite a few steering committees, you want to arrive at the meeting and have the information and understand how you can make an impact. And where the money you're giving is going, and how it's actually going towards helping the artists or whatever kind of skew the specific institution has. And so she's made it really great in terms of we have access to documents that are updating us on what's happening at the museum. And so when we get to the meetings, everybody really comes with the right questions, and it feels like we're getting stuff done.
You come informed, and then you're actually able to have really constructive conversations.
Exactly. It's not just a kind of discussion that is where you're just talking about things and you don't actually see the impact.
Yeah, it's like theoretically we would like this educational thing to be good, but it's like, no, we can look at the actual structures of the museum and what's happening and how you guys can make change.
Exactly. And one example of that is how the different fellowships that they've introduced, and the relationship with the University of Cape Town, which is the kind of historical Black university of the Western Cape. And so it's been really cool to see us Global Council members saying, how are we connecting with local artists? How are we expanding education? I actually remember, I think it was the second meeting I was at, and some of the questions that us Global Council members were asking was, how do you integrate the university students who are studying history of art or African art at the university with what's happening at the Zeitz MOCAA? Because how can you have this amazing institution and then educational institution, the University of Cape Town, and then this new museum that is really promoting this in the same city and not working together? And so it's been amazing these past couple of years, really seeing them start these fellowships that bring in the artists. And I know there's plans to really expand in a way that different artists working in the African diaspora will be able to do these fellowships and residencies and the cross-cultural exchange. So that's just one example of how I've really seen like the tangible changes in how the discussions we're having and the questions we're asking and the ideas we have are coming to fruition.
That's so powerful and important. And I think, having these conversations is really, really valuable for the sector. And we're speaking today through the facilitation of AWITA, the Association of Women in the Arts, here in London. And it's for the occasion of their annual conference, Build Your Own Art World. And that's why listeners might be hearing some sounds in the background. I'm not sure if the mics are picking it up, but we are actually currently at Christie's auction house. And so the Zeitz Museum contributes to this through, for example, as you mentioned, the fellowship program developed to educate new generations of art museum professionals in Africa, which is amazing. I don't think something like that, I don't know of something like that really exists here in London, for example, that encourages arts professionals. Like, it's really something that's truly spectacular, in my opinion, and something that we need more of. So with this in mind, I wanted to ask what building your own art world means to you.
That sounds like a huge question. Okay. I think there's many things that come to mind when you ask a question like that. Because I think, for example, what the Zeitz is doing with this program that is really focusing on art professionals is, I think, on the African continent, there hasn't been a strong mandate to develop the arts as a career path and as something that people see is for everyone. I think their different histories that the different nations have experienced because of geopolitical conflict has made us focus on economic development in a way that is obviously necessary, but for those of us who maybe aren't the future politicians and lawyers and policymakers, I think the arts and the art world is really an opportunity to understand our history and also make the commentary on like the social world around us in a way that changes people's minds and hearts, and I think gives people a real opportunity to understand one another. And you kind of really see that in, for example, when I was at Yale, I took this amazing class called The Long 1960s. And one of the topics that we discussed was the idea of negritude, which was a movement that was started in the 1960s by African French diasporic thought leaders and poets. I think one of them was who became the president of Senegal. And the whole idea was uniting a Black identity and reclaiming the narrative and how we see Blackness in conversation with culture and the economy as well. And out of that came the idea from the United Nations, the Year of Africa, and ideas around Pan-Africanism. And this kind of grew into the reach really grew, and out of that came the Afri-Cobra movement in the south side of Chicago, which is like the African commune for bad relevant artists. And what was really cool was you kind of see these parallel movements happening where the kind of mandate is the same of empowering Black identity and unifying in a way that wasn't contentious with Blackness in conjunction to Western perceptions, but rather a real celebration of identity and discovering how are we connected through Blackness, but also how our different cultures also can be highlighted and enjoyed and learned about throughout the globe. And so seeing these two kind of movements at the same time and the beautiful art and poetry that came out of it, really, I think that is when I think about what how I want to build my art world, is creating these communities where we can learn from one another, but also celebrate, but also pay homage to the struggles and the past and what people have been through, but in a way that isn't chaining us to the kind of atrocities or the pain of the past, and allowing people to use art as a way of communicating how we want the world to be, but also communicating how it has been, because I think it's a really powerful education tool. And even just like living in London, you have these amazing institutions that are bastions of culture and the past and history, and understanding how we live in conjunction with the different elements of London and the history of London and the history of the city. And there isn't that same relationship or conversation happening on the continent. And so for me, when I think about the power of the art world, I really think it is a cultural device to integrate different people and communicate histories and passions and our hopes for the future as well. Like just seeing what some really amazing young artists are doing, for example, in the When We See Us exhibit that the Zeitz MOCAA did last year, which was incredible. I went to Cape Town to see it. And it was kind of walking in through the beginning, you hear, it was a sensory experience. It wasn't just art on the walls. It was sounds, and it was quite an emotional experience. And seeing how the identities, Black identities and African identities have been constructed throughout time, but through the lens of individuals who experienced in different moments, and really being able to capture a cultural consciousness through these different objects and paintings and drawings and figurations. And so when you have something like that in one room, it was so, the emotion behind it was so palpable. And that, for me, is like, that's how you build the art world. That's how you allow individual voices to be magnified, but also understood within the context of what was happening at all these different times. And so you really felt like you go from seeing kind of the apartheid histories, but juxtaposed then with Obama's election, but then also some really joyful Black images. But then you have these paintings that address colonialism, and it's all kind of in conversation with each other, and this is all part of our histories, and it's not like one part is more important than the other, but seeing things in a way that allows us to have a full picture.
Yeah, it's not sensationalist, but it's also not, for example, focusing on only the good and not addressing the bad.
Exactly.
And it has a really important, I guess, mixture of the two, and being very real about it and approaching it in a good way.
And also, when I went to the show, I went with friends of mine that two of them were Italian and one was Korean and one was British. And they didn't really have a historical background of the different African narratives, but seeing it through the art, it was very clear.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beautiful function of art, obviously as something to enjoy and that's visually stimulating, but also to connect with people in a way that is really authentic, and also sometimes things get lost in translation, and we all have different cultures, and something that is said in one culture may not land in the other. Like I have this friend who's Spanish, and she says she's funny in Spanish but not English.
I understand that. I understand that because
exactly.
I speak two languages as well, and I'm way funnier at English.
Exactly. And so I think art is just this beautiful way of communicating that defies borders and race and creed. And so, when I think about building my art world, I want to obviously collect beautiful objects, but I think create a dialogue around identity and past and present that is inclusive and palatable for everyone, not just people who have amazing degrees from amazing institutions that understand or have had the time or the resources to study these amazing topics, but for anyone who walks into a museum off the street. And I think a lot of museums are really doing that well. Like since 2020, you've really seen an effort from different institutions to not be so unapproachable to the everyday people.
Absolutely.
Or to people who have other passions but want to learn about art or see history through the lens of different people who lived at different times. So I think that's how I want to build my art world, if that makes sense.
Women do that all the time. They give this amazing answer and then they say, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. You have made incredible points that I think are so important for our cultural sector to be thinking about, and the impact that you're making is something very, very needed in the sector. Looking ahead, are there any upcoming plans that you have that you can divulge with me here today?
So another cold email that I sent to the National Gallery, because one of my pastimes is going and Googling the annual reports of different museums.
I did that for my master's degree quite a bit. Yeah.
No, because
I love how you do that in your free time.
I know, it's kind of a bizarre thing. And so I'll go and look how these budgets are being spent and how different people, because I also think that what is undoubtable is when an individual or an institution or a corporate body donates to a museum, they inherently have impact and influence in the priorities of that institution. And so I like to see how it's kind of like a cultural experiment. And I think in many ways, the power has been held in the hands of a few people with a lot of resources, and you see the same kind of names popping up at different institutions. And so I like looking at these reports and saying, okay, here we're focusing on education, or like with the National Gallery, something that interested me was this year's their 200th anniversary, which is amazing and just crazy to think about. And something that I was reading in my just reading about the institution was how they support other museums around the UK and the exchange between lending different pieces to be exhibited in these other museums, and how do you, because the National Gallery is the country's gallery, and how do you communicate that to people who aren't in London? And when I was looking at that, I thought, wow, this is really cool, and this is really relevant to the other institutions that I am part of. And I think the best way to get the information is from the inside.
Yeah.
So I emailed them and I was like, hey, I'd love to be involved and meet with anyone who works here just to understand how you're doing this, because to get to 200 years is incredible. And also to have this institution that, I mean, they have just the sheer number of people that go in every day.
Absolutely.
And how do we replicate that or bring that to an institution on the continent of Africa? And so I ended up actually having this fabulous meeting with some of the lovely people that were working there, where they toured me around the building and told me about their plans and how they make impact. And I was like, I want in on this, please. And so thankfully, I mean, we really on the same page, and I think my expertise also and the experience I've had with the museums that I have been involved in gave a different perspective. And so in September, I will be joining the steering committee of the Young Ambassadors, which I'm super excited about because, again, I think 200 years of experience and preservation of these beautiful objects, there's a lot to learn for other institutions that are younger, and that in 200 years, when the Zeitz MOCAA has been around for that long, how will we have shared knowledge? And also I think there's something really cool about an African institution learning from a British institution and having this cultural exchange.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Vice versa. And
Yeah.
also, like, me as a Zimbabwean black woman being involved with both institutions. Like, this is, like, really
And
the
if I
first
may
time in
say,
history.
a young Zimbabwean woman.
Yeah.
Like, I think that that's also really important to
Yeah.
talk about as well, is, like, reaching younger audiences and taking
Exactly.
the perspective of someone who's, like, around our age.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's so important. And it's like, I feel like when I last went to the National Gallery, I went at like 10 a.m. and there was all these little school children in their uniforms literally lying on the ground, like drawing, looking up at the permanent collection and copying it. And I was like, this is unheard of, like even 10 years ago. And it was a real multicultural group of kids, and just thinking that this feels like it belongs to the people of London and the people of the UK. And I think that's so important. And just changing those narratives around art and art objects, and it not just being something that is collected by one wealthy person who dies and then leaves it to an institution, but something that we all get to enjoy in various degrees and without discrimination. So, yeah, I mean, I'm excited about that and how I can learn from, that amazing group and bring that to the other kind of. And also, I'm not really as knowledgeable about kind of 19th century.
It's a different type of art.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. So, I think I might have a little bit of imposter syndrome on there, but I'll do my best to contribute.
Joanna, I have one final question for you because I do hear it's getting louder outside, and that means that we need to wrap up.
Yeah.
It's just a fun question to end the episode that I like to ask all of my guests on the podcast, and that is, if you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
I wish I could have a different one for breakfast and then lunch and then dinner.
You can do that too. I had someone on the podcast previously, Lucy Donovan, and she said she would have a starter, a main course, and dessert, and that's how she did it. So yeah, let's do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think for breakfast, I would have Barbara Jones Hogu, who was one of the founding members of the Afri Cobras in Chicago. And the reason I would choose her is she was one of the only women who was, I think the only woman who was a founding member. And the way that the messages that she was conveying in her art were very, very contentious. Like, this is in the 60s and she's talking about Black liberation. But it was so, like, visually engaging for anyone. It's just like beautiful, like on a baseline level. And so just really like getting to pick the brain of someone who was doing something like that at a time where it was kind of unheard of. And then for lunch, I think I would actually have lunch with Yoko Ono. I think I need to ask her about how cut piece, all these people coming up and cutting parts of her garment, how she didn't freak out, because I am like in the tube freaking out if somebody just like breathes on me. And I just think that like that level of vulnerability and conviction to share your perspective by sharing your body in that way is so incredible, and there's so much to learn from someone who has that kind of courage. And then for dinner, I'm trying to not have any men.
I love that. Yeah.
I think for dinner, I might actually choose a living artist. So there's this Zimbabwean artist, Kudzanai Violet Hwami, and I think she's a couple years older than us. And I think seeing someone whose career is booming like that and who's making this incredible work and who comes from the same country as me, I think, how can we work together, and how can we take the art world by storm and tell these beautiful stories and uplift our people and our country? I think that's important to me too, because of course going back in history and meeting these past figures is great, but it's like we don't know who will be to the people of the future. And so I think having dinner with someone who's around now and my contemporary and doing amazing things would also be really cool.
All right. Joanna, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and taking time to sit down with me here today. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.